Yeah, we're on. I'm just going to very briefly introduce this attachment. This attachment is logically laid out and fairly straightforward. It builds a compelling story that, based on our 10-year plan, we predicted a certain level of population growth over the 10-year period. Our most current information indicates that population is going to be greater than that. Our dwelling and our resource consent's been issued, a number of dwellings have been built, has increased. Basically, the report indicates there is a supply-demand gap, and the part of the compelling story that Chris is going to talk to is that we need to invest in infrastructure and bring infrastructure forward from within the 10-year plan to effectively unlock growth opportunities. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris to basically outline his proposals.
To compel us. Compelling story.
That's right. I think it is a compelling story, Gary.
Right, I've just got.
Are we allowed to ask questions of what the CE
yes,
just said?
Most definitely, Councillor King, we are. But what we're going to do is to have the report introduced, and the Chief Executive has done a brief introduction, and we're now going to go to the General Manager responsible for infrastructure, and then most definitely we will be open for questions.
Do questions directly about what Richard has just said?
Questions?
Yes.
Correct.
Are we allowed to ask questions of Richard on what he just spoke about?
Correct.
Now,
as I said to you just a moment ago, we're going to have the report introduced, and then we're going to go to questions just like we normally do.
thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. So look, I've just got a couple of pictures up there rather than PowerPoint, just so I can locate councillors. So just a quick refresh. Look, in the development of the 10-year plan, Council's primary focus was looking after our existing infrastructure, and that meant some pretty significant investment in citywide infrastructure, our plants, reservoirs, wet weather storage, interceptors, major arterials. So those investments were particularly helpful supporting where 50% of our growth is going to come from in infill and investment and intensification. So Council has then made some decisions in the plan based on sticking to a financial strategy that limited our ability to put infrastructure in all of our greenfield areas. So as Richard has just outlined, growth is running ahead of predictions, and we've been considering where advancing infrastructure from where it is in the 10-year plan would provide the best yields for sections to the market and economic development. So in looking for those locations, we've really considered the matters that are on page 28 and paragraph 27. So we were looking for areas where there was a strong alignment with our growth strategy that Council signed off. We wanted to leverage off our existing investments in significant infrastructure where we've put the pipes in, so for a small investment, high yield. And really important to what I'm going to talk about is in areas where we've got willing and ready to go developers that are turning dirt now and producing sections. And the last one was a bit of scale. So when we looked at the city, and I look at all the areas, if you go to our first priority, infill intensification, Council has got its funding right. I think we've got the funding in the right time and in the right place to sort of keep pace with development. If I look at our priority 1 greenfield area, Rotatuna, once again Council's got its investment right. In terms of working with the developers, we've got funding in there for finishing off Borman Road and other bits and infrastructure, but I think we've got that about right and we're keeping pace with the developers. If I move to our next priority area, which is Peacock Stage 1, once again I think we've got the infrastructure right. In fact, the developers are not really coming forward to take advantage of some of the infrastructure that we've got there now. So we wouldn't put any more spend into Peacock Stage 1. Apart from some work in ICMPs with integrated catchment management plans, which I'd come to. Just to note that we are working really well with future developers in Peacocks and in terms of their future development of the Peacocks growth area, but it's not a time for investment in infrastructure over the next 1 or 2 years. So the area that we quickly come to is this Roto Cowrie area. Just a quick orientation. Is it? Sorry. So just before I move on to the slide, I just wanted to quickly orientate councillors. So this is our Rotokauri growth cell. There's the Te Rapa bypass. Essentially, our land use is industrial on this side, some employment on the other side, but residential through these areas here. So the area that I'm particularly going to focus on the next slide is Te Wetini Drive. So councillors will know that we've built the road to about there, and the Windtech is in this location. So one of the bits of infrastructure we're talking about is an extension of Te Wetini Drive there, and development in this part of Rotokauri Stage 1. So I'll just figure out how to move forward. Oops, right. So just look, this slide here is a slide that we put up for councillors when we were developing the 10-year plan. And you can see, once again, Windtech here, Te Wetini Drive. This was the slide that councillors used to make some decisions on advancing the very significant Far Eastern Interceptor. So if councillors recall, we brought through quite a significant big wastewater pipe through there, which had significant citywide benefits, but it was also infrastructure where we could leverage growth in Rotokauri.
Chris, is that actually on the back of an envelope?
At that point in time it was, but
Looks like
that was a year and a bit ago, and
No, it's a joke, Chris, it's a joke.
Don't harass
He
the
knew it was a joke. He knew it was a
It's
joke.
a hand-drawn,
don't harass the engineer.
look, I did that
Moving
myself, Councillor Mellon. I thought it was
Well, I
pretty
know
good and accurate.
yeah, I think it's very good.
Yeah, plain English, no
Yeah,
not
exactly.
technical.
We can read it.
Certainly nothing fluffy there.
I guess my point that I wanted to make is that when we were developing the 10-year plan, we certainly had this in mind of an area to service. We put in the large infrastructure, but because of our financial strategy, we didn't advance some other infrastructure to help with the development there. And the proposal in front of us today is to advance some infrastructure there just to help the development. We certainly had quite a few submissions on this one in part of the 10-year plan to advance that infrastructure, certainly from the main development company there, which is Rotokauri Developments Limited, which is a mixture of developers, Malcolm McDonald and family, David Lunkton and family, and Tainui Group Holdings, Everton Trust, the HJV, Hamilton Joint Venture and Chalmers Group, Property Council, in a general sense, have all advocated through the 10-year plan for advancing infrastructure in this area. Can you just go forward one? Oops, sorry, here we go. I've got it. So look, a little bit hard to see, but what I've tried to show here, look, our proposals for advancing infrastructure are on page 30 of Councillor's agenda item. And just to show you where the development activity is happening. So this is, you can see a little circle here. This is the circle of lands that are held between Rotokauri Developments Limited and the Hamilton JV. So they are developers that are here and now and working, particularly RDL. This is the 50-lot subdivision that has already been built by Rotokauri Developments. These are two subdivisions which are going through the process and we're working with them on now. So over 1 to 2 years, a lot of activity happening there. As they move forward into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, this is the area that we will see developing. So in discussions with the whole development group there through the ICMP, the bits of infrastructure that we think are important for council to bring forward are the extension of Te Wetini Drive. So that's a major arterial, which is normally a road that council would provide, but it pokes the transport link right into the proposed town centre in the heart of the development. So it's a pretty significant one, I think, for council to work in partnership with that group to bring forward. The second one is wastewater. So while we've put in the big Far Eastern Interceptor there, the Far Western Interceptor, we still need other council infrastructure to put wastewater servicing to the site. So there's some funding there for another pump station in there. The biggest issue that we have with the development of the whole Rotokauri cell is stormwater. So there's quite some significant infrastructure, we believe, to get some control of this very important part of the green swale, which is in lands not owned by that development group, but it'll be really important for developing stormwater solutions to enable this part of Rotokauri to move ahead without building some of the big infrastructure that will be required in the future. So that's all I intended to say on Rotokauri. So in terms of our next proposal is Ruakura. So if I keep to residential at the moment, we have another developer called Chedworth Properties up here. So once again, it's a developer who's very active. He's consented this one up here at the moment, and very active plans to just keep churning out sections and through, particularly here. The problem or the issue that we have is he's going so fast that we need to have some infrastructure funding for upsizing to put in the roads that he's building, because it's very difficult to come back later on once the area's developed and put the bigger pipes in that'll be needed to service the whole Ruakura lands. So there's some pretty significant bringing forward of wastewater infrastructure so we can keep pace with that residential developer.
Excuse me, Chris, is that close to where those swale things are that we were,
Yep, so it's a really quite a unique sort of development.
has that worked? What's the update on that?
It's worked in the sense of the market, so he's got a very strong market demand for his product. So
Sorry,
first
no, I
of
mean,
all,
has the test that they were doing, what are the results on that? Have that?
yeah, not across the top of the test, but look, the actual stormwater solution is sort of well anchored in technical information and how it will work, but I'm just not sure of the results of this.
If it's actually worked?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably more important for Ruakura is the prospect of working with Tainui Group Holdings as they develop their inland port and associated activities. So the funding that we're asking for in this proposal is set out on page 29. But it's essentially to bring forward some upsizing funding we had for wastewater from about year 9 to about year 2 to develop the main wastewater pipe that will go right through the Ruakura lands. So that investment buys us the ability to service the whole of the Ruakura lands. There is some land that the Tainui don't control, which is in this location here, a couple of properties. So some funding to buy that, and why we want to purchase that is so we can then have between us control of the whole major, the minor arterial that goes from north to south, noting that it's also a corridor where we put in our water pipes and our wastewater pipes. So there's just some property there that's not under the control of either ourselves or the developer. And a proposal for working with them to provide a water reservoir. So look, the third proposal, which I don't have a slide for, is just some extra funding for ICMPs, so integrated catchment management plans. So look, they're proving to be a very important planning document that is a prerequisite to having good and optimal development. So we've been on a journey of understanding of these ICMPs over the last year. We have a really good understanding of them now. And we're starting to put them out to keep pace with the development that's happening. So in terms of the Rototuna area, by the end of this year, we would have completed the 3 significant ICMPs, or largely completed the 3 significant ICMPs for completing the Rototuna growth cell. The funding next year is to complete the Rotokauri growth cell ICMP. Rotokauri has been a really significant ICMP for us for a number of reasons. One's the size of the catchment and the ecological sensitivity of the lands out there. So everything's draining into the Peat Lake system, and councillors probably heard some of the submissions about Waiwhakariki and the ecological sensitivity of the area. There's significant groundwater issues and a lot of stakeholder sensitivity. So it'd be great to have that ICMP in place, which just pulls all of those issues together in one document and aligns all of the stakeholders, and we all understand what the right solutions are. The funding that we're asking for will also allow us to progress the ICMPs for the Peacocks area and Temple View. So somewhere in the work program is to look at a structure plan for Temple View. It's really important, as we've found, to have ICMPs to work in conjunction with the structure planning. So the extra funding will just allow us to have the ICMPs ready for when we're moving into our next growth cells. So, councillors, I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those proposals.
Okay, so councillors, including questions on the entire report, and there'll be different people that can answer those. So I've got Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Your Worship. On page 30, Chris, your couple of grids there, budget adjustments. The second one, the one that says budget adjustments, that's the cost of 16-17, 17-18, 18-19, 19-20 accumulates at $17 million. And that's
So
an
we're looking
additional...
at page 30,
So page
and
30,
we're looking at,
so you got
so
the,
that's for Ruakura.
there's a grid
Yep.
that says 10-year plan budget, then there's another grid or graph or
Yeah.
that says budget adjustments, benefits,
Yeah.
costs and brackets, and the figures in brackets total $17 million, $17,030,000.
Yep.
Those are,
So what the top graph is showing, and Stephen can jump in if I get this
Yep.
wrong, but the top graph is showing what is in our current 10-year plan budget. So that's all the funding that we have in and the years that we've got it in to provide infrastructure for the associated with the Ruakura growth cell. The proposals that we've set out in paragraph 34, the changes to what we had in our 10-year plan are what are shown in the budget adjustments. So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, there's a figure of 4.2 million. So it's an extra 4 million of what's in the 10-year plan at the moment, and that's largely related to the water proposal that we have in front of you. Wastewater is just bringing funding forward. There is extra funding for the transport and water.
okay. So the net, just in terms of the out to 1920, we are bringing forward expenditure, or it's new expenditure, to the tune of about $17 million. Am I reading that
Where
right?
did you get the 17?
That's just the
Oh,
total
you're
of
just adding-
2.3 million plus
Yes.
4.5 million
Yes.
plus 5.7 million.
Yep, that's
See those
largely,
figures?
that's largely correct, bringing it forward, yes.
Okay, so, all right, so that's, and that's done within debt caps?
Correct, that's,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the other question was, going back to the Ruakura growth cell.
Yeah.
A bunch of us went out to see John Webb's swale
yep, Chedworth.
experiment out there.
Yep.
To what extent is the work, the development of that, and I think it's Chedworth Properties or
Chedworth
Chartwell
Chedworth
Properties. To what extent is the development out there reliant on them improving that stormwater system? Because from memory, it wasn't months, it was a few years sort of worth of experiment, wasn't it? I can't quite remember that.
So Chedworth has got his consents
Yep.
for Area J, so he's got his consents for that. He's bringing forward the rest of his development over a number of years by different plans, section by section. So
Sorry, Chris, just to make it really simple, I guess what I'm saying is you're asking us to bring forward some projects in bullet point number 2. So I'm
Yeah.
on page 32, purpose, number 1, bullet point 2, Rotocarry stage 1.
Yeah.
I beg your pardon, Ruakura growth
Yeah.
cell, my apologies.
Yeah.
Ruakura growth cell, you're asking us to bring funding forward, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That can happen, has his stormwater, What is the relationship of that question to the stormwater thing that he's doing?
So the funding that we're asking council to bring forward is not stormwater funding. It's just for water and wastewater.
Yep.
So the compliance for stormwater is entirely at the risk of Chedworth. So we're not bringing forward funding for stormwater. So John needs to comply. So Andrew's just passed me a note and to say the trial that he's undertaking out there is more aligned with the types of plants that he uses in his wetlands. So what plants are going to survive over time. So I don't think it's about the fundamentals of his stormwater system. It's just what are the best types of plants that will survive in that environment out there to cleanse the water and do all the things that wetlands do.
So you guys are confident that his part of the deal, which is getting the stormwater thing sorted, will be compliant, because it would seem nonsensical to have wastewater and drinking water in place and everything then waiting for him to complete his project.
Yeah, look, I'm very confident on that. I don't have some of the detail you're looking for, but
Yeah.
I am very confident on that. Yep.
If you're very confident, then I'm
Yeah,
confident.
but he's already got consent for Area J, which is 150 lots. So he's worked through the stormwater issues and is managing his stormwater.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, I've got Deputy Mayor. Do I have you?
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. A question to Chris. Refer you to point 20 on page 27. You were doing some work to decide whether developers were withholding supply, and you discovered that there's about 35 to 40% of sections not yet available. Are you in fact saying that there is evidence that developers are withholding supply?
Yeah, so we don't have any means to require developers to develop their land. So look, I wouldn't be able to answer the reasons why they're not developing their land, but there's certainly lands around which are not waiting for council infrastructure. So developers will make all sorts of reasons about when they bring it to the market. Number one, is there a market for it and the timing of that? So it's probably a question that I can't answer in terms of what's driving developers to hold on to land. We certainly look at the strategic servicing needs and what we need to supply and go and have conversations with a lot of those developers to make sure they're not being held up by infrastructure. Now, there are some areas that we know that will be the case, and Peacock Stage 2 is clearly one in terms of some of the strategic servicing requirements there. But why they would be holding on to property, they can only answer that.
Yeah, I've simply asked that question because the occasional developer gives council a flick about not providing the land in which to subdivide, but the evidence appears, and you haven't directly answered, but if I put words in your mouth, there is evidence that developers have been withholding supply. And I have to assume that one of the compelling reasons might well be increasing section prices. Why sell today when you can sell tomorrow at a higher price?
Yep,
So,
okay. I mean, that's just giving an opinion without any evidence. Okay, and that's good. So the general manager's answered best he can, and what he said is he's not the developer, so he can't actually answer why they're holding. But the more important question is are we being an impediment to holding?
So, and I'll come back to my answer that we're quite active in talking to those developers and trying to understand whether there are infrastructure requirements from our part holding them back. So we try and work with them on issues that we can control, but it's really their business to judge the market. A lot of them are judging the market, and that could very well be true, Councillor Chesterman, that they judge their timing in terms of what money they make. They may make decisions not to bring it to market.
I think just to add to Chris's comments is that there are other evidence there, Deputy Mayor, which would probably add to some of the assumptions you were making there. The value of section sale prices is increasing quite rapidly, and you've seen that in the charts. The availability of land available to the general public for sale is almost non-existent.
But there's a reason for that, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
Being larger companies are purchasing, building companies. Yeah.
That's correct. There is sustained and quite clearly evidence increased demand for land and for new dwellings, higher than that we anticipate in the long-term plan, and you've seen those in the charts in front of you. So there are a number of metrics to support some of the conclusions I think you're outlining.
Okay, I've got Councillor King next.
This is probably more directed at Richard. On page 27, paragraph 23, conclusion. As we know, the sustained increase for demand for new housing, the higher number of building consents is highly likely to continue over the next 12 months. We've also got a very, very sick dairy industry, and I just hope that you're taking, my question is you're taking into account the fact that in Hamilton, traditionally the market has hugely turned very quickly when it does turn, and that you're not counting on the flush hand we've got at the moment being playable in the future.
No, so that's why we've been quite tactical in our response, Councillor. So two things is, if you look at the figure on page 26, the increased dwellings consents that have been issued is far more of a slow burn increase rather than the rampant one we had prior to the GFC, than the big crash. That doesn't necessarily suggest it won't crash, but you know, these are some of the signals we're looking at. Chris has made sure, and if you look at the criteria by which he's assessed the infrastructure requirements against on page 28, paragraph 27, the key part of that is willing developers. So he's had his conversations and has a very close relationship with the developers. So we're not only looking at the evidence from the data we're receiving, but it's also the direct investigation and the discussion with the developers as well. So your point's very well made. We're very much aware of that context, and so we've done what we can above and beyond just the data to make sure that if we invest in this infrastructure, there's actually a willing developer there to actually make use of it and turn those sections into a marketable product. So point well made, and we are working through that to make sure that we shore up our bets as best we can. And that overlying aspect of this is the rest of the budget, like the 10-year plan, is built around conservative numbers as well. We try our best to be conservative, and we believe that through the investigations that have been undertaken, this is there's a high degree of certainty. You can't guarantee, but a high degree of certainty.
And just moving on, the pipe work that you're putting out through to the Tainui inland port area, are you still allowing for the upsizing of that, for the possibility of Peacock's opening?
No. So look, we've advanced our wastewater master planning, and we believe that Ruakura can be serviced on its own. So the funding is just to service the broader Ruakura area, not just the Tainui port, but the broader eastlands of Ruakura. We're working very closely with the Peacock Stage 2 developers at the moment, and looking at a revised system for servicing the Peacock's land, which will be a pressure system. So we have done enough work to be satisfied that there is a better solution for Peacocks in there, cheaper and more easy to construct than what the deep gravity sewer pipe would have been all the way from the north of Hamilton. So we've done sufficient work to satisfy ourselves that's possible. We're in active engagements with some of the Peacocks developers at the moment to progress that to a next level of understanding.
So we've heard all this before. we put a road right the way down that side of the city that could have had a pipe underneath it, didn't get the pipe underneath it. We lost that opportunity forever. We are now saying, last time we had a briefing, we were saying we were going to upsize the pipes. Now you're saying we don't have to. Is what you're looking at going to carry the wastewater for the whole of the Peacocks area, not just one development, one stage? So are you satisfied that this new pressure proposal is going to be big enough to carry all the wastewater from the whole of the Peacocks area that we've got zoned?
Yes.
Okay, now moving back over to Rotakari. Where is the bottleneck going to come on that system? Because there is other land still to be developed out Temple View Way, which will need to come through that system, and is the large Rotakari proposal going to create a wastewater bottleneck somewhere, which is going to stop areas out further from getting on the system?
So if we go to the far western interceptor, the installation of that will to some degree assist in other areas of the west, but there are other interventions that we've got in our 10-year plan to deal with the capacity issues on the western side. And in particular, we've got some work over the next 1 to 2 years on some significant work on one of our pump stations at Lawn Street, and the wet weather storage proposal that we're developing up. So we have, through our master planning, identified other interventions. They are funded in the 10-year plan. They will all assist with some of the challenges on the western side of the city, and the far western interceptor is part of that package that does assist. Doesn't solve it, but it assists.
So with the intense proposals for Rotakari, that's not going to cause a bottleneck between there and the plant?
The proposals that we're putting in front of council today? No,
when it's fully developed, is there still going to be spare capacity between there and the plant?
Yes, absolutely, because the far western interceptor sort of doubles our sector capacity in that area. We'll have a western interceptor and a far western interceptor, so it's beneficial. Yeah, so it definitely won't create a bottleneck.
So there will be room in the system from Rotakari on to bring another wastewater should the opportunities arise?
Yeah, our challenge.
I understand there may be bottlenecks down further. I'm making sure there's no bottlenecks from there to the plant.
So we have, if councillors recall our 10-year plan discussion, there is one bottleneck at a place called Moreland Avenue, but we've got that programmed and it's in our 10-year plan to fix. We prioritised we brought the far western interceptor forward, and we moved that bottleneck out. So we've flipped them around in terms of its timing into year 7. So the funding is in there to fix one of the known bottlenecks. Yeah. But the challenges for the western side of the city and Temple View and down there are really south of Rotakari and the pipeline getting to Rotakari.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Forsyth?
A question talked about procurement of lands not provided by Tainui and Chedworth along the arterial spine. I just want a little bit more detail around those lands. Can you describe them? Are they residential? How many? How far along the procurement process are we? I just wanting to, having been through the horrible situation with Percival Road residents and us not understanding what those other land lots were. I just want more of an understanding on what these lands are.
So they're nowhere near the Percival Road for a start. They're 2 properties, so they're residential properties. They just sit in the Spine Road corridor that's going through the Ruakura variation at the moment. So there'll be clear indications that those properties will sit on a future road. We haven't progressed those discussions at all. Like, it's hard to progress those discussions unless we had a funding provision in there to bring certainty to what we would embark on. Yep.
So it's just two, and we haven't started yet. And obviously we need to have like you said, a financial package to start with. So,
so can I just be clear, in terms of the rest of the land for that whole Spine Road corridor, it'd be under the control of Chedworth, Tainui, and through the partnership approach that we're taking, there will be, the council will end up in control of the whole corridor, so it's only these two properties on the entire north-south spine that is outside our collective control through the partnership.
so the rest of the land, did you say, is owned by Chedworth and Tainui?
Correct. And part of the deal that we're working with is, as they develop, vesting the corridor, and so over time, there's no big land purchase program required to build the transport infrastructure, and indeed the conveyance corridor for water and wastewater, because it'll be in the same corridor. So there's no big land purchase program required from council for development of the Ruakura cell.
And yeah, okay. So, and what's that distance? What that sort of kilometre?
It's about 6 to 8 kilometres, Andrew. Yeah, say 6 kilometres. Yep.
Okay, that's great. And that's within the Ruakura structure itself.
Yes.
So just thank you. That's really clear. And just the is it water? Well, probably sewage and water. When you're saying that we're going to bring forward to increase the capacity in the network for water demand and sewerage, so that's for the residential aspect only of the Ruakura plan, or is it to unlock and enable and fast track the whole industrial side of the project as well?
It's for both, and it's for the whole of the Ruakura cell, and indeed citywide benefits when you come to water. So what the proposal we're looking at is, just in a simple statement, that Tainui Group Holdings and Chedworth would be responsible for servicing lands that they own, and they're quite substantial. But council's contributions would be to ensure that the infrastructure is integrated and sustainable and looks after all of the other landholders there, so they can get access to wastewater and water services. So
when you say all the other landholders there, do you mean just the new dwellings that will come forward in the plan, or dwellings outside of that Ruakura plan as well? So existing dwellings that are
so the in particular the water would support all of the land, no matter who owns it in the whole Ruakura. It'll also support intensification plans in the existing built environment, so people are subdividing and need access to more water through subdivision. The proposals have citywide benefits, so it helps with the whole eastern side of Hamilton, in fact. So that is why we're in the partnership, is to look at the broader city benefits of infrastructure.
And so, thank you, I understand that. So what's our zoning for that part of town? I mean, you're saying it enables some infill or some higher density type development. Does our district plan, or does the zoning allow for that over there?
Yeah, I'll give the answer as I understand it. So I think for the existing built environment, the existing city, the planning is in place to allow people to take advantage of infill and intensification. The lands in Ruakura, some of them, the lands owned by Chedworth and Tainui, have been authorised for development through the Board of Inquiry process. Council is now going through a Ruakura variation, which is intended to bring all of the rest of the lands into Ruakura into a planning sort of framework.
I think just to add to that, around the university, around 5 Crossroads, those areas are intensification areas in the plan. And so I think as Chris is saying, the network into Ruakura would actually support the infrastructure to support those. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gallagher?
Beyond today, I would be interested in ongoing intelligence around sections that could be put on the market that are being withheld, you know, because it's obviously supply and demand, about housing affordability, and it is about the big issue of what public investment is put into trying to provide more sections and more houses, and why business people, for reasons which I can understand, want to get the equilibrium price up to return to their investors. But I think it's important. I think certainly central government can be critical of local government, but I think we've got to be clear in our message of what we have done and what actually sections are literally sitting out there who could be on the market but are not for reasons of price advantage to the seller.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think just to be clear, Councillor Gallagher, they're not necessarily section developed either. They may just be bare land.
Yeah, well, but I think in terms of you see, what I'm trying to get at here is you know, local government gets a lot of stick, and we have this whole debate around we're not doing enough, right? But I want to do, within the context of doing enough, I think the Deputy Mayor of the city raises a very valid point. It's a very valid point the Deputy Mayor's raised, is the other side of that equation is the investor-developer playing ducks and drakes around price, which doesn't help us around housing affordability.
Fairly clear
Okay.
request.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question just coming out of Councillor Gallagher's and Councillor Chesterman's comments. I suppose if we are active as a council in ensuring that there are sufficient pieces of land around the city coming on the market, then of course it does create the supply that's needed. Is that a fair assessment, and is that perhaps in your thinking around having the availability of sections in different parts of the city being available to create that supply?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that I had before their comments, rather than their questions, is around the $4.2 million additional funding, given that that's not currently in the long-term plan. And if it wasn't approved today by council, and I think, Chris, your earlier comment was that if we didn't do it now, we may have to go in at some future time and put in the bigger pipes or whatever's required. And obviously that would be a greater cost than perhaps putting them in now. Given that it's not in the LTP, will we miss out on development contributions if that 4.2 million is not approved, that expenditure is not approved?
To the extent that development occurs and we don't have something in our capital expenditure program, we can't then go back and charge those sections at a later stage. So, correct, by bringing this into our annual plan, we would update our development levies from July,
Okay.
and then we can take a contribution towards these costs through that process from July.
And given that we collect around 50% of that infrastructure cost back in DCs, albeit over a varying period of time, because we don't know how long that time is going to be, is it fair to say that if we don't approve this additional spend today, and we subsequently have to spend it at some future stage, the actual cost to the city will be double what it would be if we haven't had the benefit of collecting the 50% back in DCs?
It's a reasonable assumption.
Yep. Thank you.
Councillor Leary?
Thank you. My question is just on H in your part of the attachment 4, and it's just around the funding. You're asking for an additional funding of 862,000, and this is relating to the integrated catchment management plans. When you talked about this to us late last year, I had some questions around WRC's involvement in this. And because this new work is a requirement that they've put on us to do. And so this is a considerable amount of extra funding, and I understand the reasons for that. But my questions then were around what I've just said, WRC's involvement in this, and also the volume of work that they would have around these, around the information that we have to populate into these catchment management plans, and how we could benefit from that, and maybe reducing these costs. I mean, this is heading towards $1 million for something they've decided that we need to do. So I don't know if you have any helpful comments on all of those kind of questions.
Look, I do have some comments. One is that it's not quite correct just to say that we're only doing them because WRC has decided that they want us to do them. Look, ICMPs are a really, really important document for us in terms of managing our infrastructure and being efficient in infrastructure. Look, if we don't have a coordinated approach to our greenfield developments, we'll get very uncoordinated and suboptimal infrastructure. And the example I use a lot is the stormwater management. So every little developer that's developing will have to provide ponds that will be vested in us and that we've got to look after. The ponds will probably all be oversized, so that'll gobble into our productive land for development. So the whole idea of an ICMP is to optimise things like that. So a lot of the cost and the work goes into our flood modelling and our hydraulic modelling, so we can be very optimal in terms of an optimum sized stormwater pond that maximises the productive land for development in the area, that reduces our whole of life costings in terms of looking after these things, because make no mistakes, the new regime of stormwaters with wetlands and ponds is very, very expensive to maintain. So the point I'm making is that ICMPs are a really important document for us to manage our development. So you can come right back to the Resource Management Act, where the obligations are on us to, and not regional council, to control the effects of land use and development to avoid or mitigate natural hazards. So look, the obligations we have under the Resource Management Act to do that. The regional council have things through their regional policy statement that drive us to do some of the work we're doing as well, and they're related to climate change, and particularly our district plans need to respond to flood hazards up to the 1 in 100 year flood events. So these are new requirements that are coming through from the top, finding their way into policy documents that require us to have regard to 1 in 100 year flood. What happens in a 1 in 100 year flood? Where's the water going to go? Now, we need to know that on a catchment-wide basis. You just can't have individual developers going in and trying to do that work. So I guess the last part of the question is, look, we got a really close association with regional council as we're developing these things. It's important that we develop something that fits with what they want, because they are locked into our comprehensive stormwater consent as well, an approval process for regional council. But we work together. Now, regional council traditionally have a lot of modelling and information on river flooding, which is a top priority for them, but land use and what happens to land use is more our business than regional council's business. So we work together and collaborate in terms of the information that we collectively hold, that all comes together to help with the development of an ICMP.
So before we had these, I'm assuming we would have had management plans for different areas and for different activities across the land. So are these, is it proposed that these sit on the top of those, or is this intended to replace those?
When you say to replace what, catchment management plan?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've gone for a while without having these, so this is a new level of management that we are embarking on.
Yep. So a couple of answers to that, I guess. We have driven, catchment management plans have been driven into us through our consent, our comprehensive stormwater consent. The integrated part and the integrated catchment management plans we've driven into our district plan through wanting to have a good understanding of all infrastructure, so that's water, wastewater, transport and stormwater, because they all work together. But we are, as I say, moving into a new world in terms of regulation coming down about climate change, but also we're now, for council for a long time we've been leveraging off one growth cell, so we're moving into multiple growth cells, and if you take Rotokauri, we're right at the beginning of developing a significant growth cell, so it's almost inconceivable to me that we wouldn't have an ICMP that understood that whole growth cell and how the stormwater is going to work, so we can provide what developers expect as in guidance on how they can develop their little bit to fit into the overall picture of how the stormwater system works. Look, in council's investment in the stormwater of Rotokauri will be significant. We've got $23 million in the 10-year plan at the moment, but there'd be at least that much required coming through as we move forward in the 10-year plan to develop stormwater solutions out there to develop the whole cell.
And just one last question. So are we looking at a future where at each annual plan or at the LTP we're going to, as the city grows and as we move through developing these plans, that we're going to be faced with additional funding, more costs? Where are we on the spectrum of at 100% the city's covered by integrated catchment plans, and funded, we're at 50%?
So with this extra funding, which is for 2 years, 16, 17, 17, 18, we will have completed our integrated catchment management plans for all of our priority greenfield growth cells. What we do have a funded program continuously over 10 years, and we'll have to go back to look at integrated catchment management plans within our existing built environment and how we just manage the effects of climate change and etc. in our existing built environment. And the other point is the integrated catchment management plans will be a live document that every 7 years will need updating, but once we've got a catchment management plan, the process of updating it should be relatively straightforward, but there will still be ongoing funding requirements to keep them live, relevant and up to date, and incorporating what has happened over the last 7 years, like what area the city has grown, what stormwater devices did get put in, what solutions did get put in, and make sure looking forward that that's still all integrated.
So,
but I think it's a big hump that we're in now to get over with this funding, and then we've, I know my language, largely cracked the ICMP issue, and then it's just keeping pace with them.
So you're saying then that once we get over, your words, this hump, then we will have, updating these plans aside,
yep,
all of the plans that we're required in our boundary for our city. So there's not going to be any more.
Yep,
We've either started work or are due to start work on all of them.
Yep, and significantly for us is Peacocks and Temple View. So like we know it's a growth cell, we know it's an important growth cell, so by the end of the second year we'll have a really good document that helps us work with developers to efficiently and optimally develop the Peacocks lands. And the other point too is the catchment management plans don't have any respect for jurisdictional boundaries. So they do actually, if you look at the map, go way outside our boundaries as well. So I guess they'd be useful documents for future discussions with council about boundary changes or bringing other lands into...
So I probably already know the next answer then is that if they are across that boundary, I don't suppose any other territorial authority has chipped in to pay for this?
No, because all we're really doing is looking outside our boundary and what the baseline is, and what the and mostly it's rural land which is not going to change mostly. So most of the change comes from development inside our urban boundaries, which is putting loads, contaminant water loads onto existing waterways. So we're really, the bulk of our work is just assessing the impacts of our urban footprint on natural waterways and floodways.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, just one, Your Worship. Chris, on the spine road through Ruakura there, we have to purchase 2 properties in order to get your pipes in and your road built. Probably a silly question, but are we eligible for funding, 51% from NZTA for the purchase of the properties, as it's all part of the road, isn't it?
We, as a matter of course, when we get to that point, would always look at the opportunities for it, but I'd have to say at this point in time, and my understanding of it, it would be a really hard argument to form that it was a strategic part of our network. And it's a question of timing as well. Like, I don't think that the spine road will be built in that location for a number of years, so you'd have to, a bit like what we do now for the ring road. We've bought the land a long time ago, and now we're at the point of building it. We've gone back and got retrospective subsidies, so we'd probably be looking at that maybe in 20 years' time if we were going to build the road, whether we thought the rules were right or the opportunity was right to go and ask for a retrospective subsidy.
So in view of the inland port there, we couldn't really call it a road of national significance then, do you think?
No, but bear in mind that the work that's been done on the Waikato Expressway and the work that Tainui have done with NZTA directly, council is not contributing at all to the interchange or the connection from the interchange through to our roading network. So there's no proposal on the table that we are putting any funding into that, with one exception, is the main road coming in from the interchange. It will be a 2-lane road to deal with the immediate traffic. We're designing it so it could be upgraded to 4 lanes in the future if it needed to be. So we would take that responsibility, but it would be in the future. We just want to make sure we've got the land corridor there now.
Okay. I just have a question on the Moreland Road matter, which you referred to earlier. So what year is that currently in the budget to address?
Yeah, it's about year 7. But
And
remembering
so,
too, the investment we're making in the far western reduces the importance of doing Moreland Road, because we'll have 2 directions to take our stuff.
Right. So my next question was then, is there an imperative of advancing that project in light of the discussions we've been having today?
No, I don't. I think it sits okay there, and I don't think it won't be holding up any growth proposals.
Okay, that's fine. Good. All right. A very informative infrastructure discussion, particularly on ICMPs. So, is there any other questions? No? Okay, so if we go back to our resolutions page, which is on page 10, paragraph 41, and I'm going to move F, G and H. And if I could have a seconder, Councillor Pascoe is seconding that. Okay, is there any debate? Anyone wish to speak? No? Okay, so we're going to go to the board to vote. Everyone's clear? F, G and H?
Carried unanimously.
That must have been that ICMP discussion that you just...
I enjoyed it, Chris.
Endorsement of an engineer. Well done, Chris.
Yes,
Slam dunk.
that's good.
Okay,
Just getting close to
so
lunch,
councillors,
that's all.
just a couple of queries here. I think it would be unhelpful to interrupt the discussion on the indoor rec centre, because, you know, you get the flow and you want to keep going. So I'm wondering if we break for lunch now. Are people happy with that?
Yeah.
And if we came back at 1 o'clock, is that all right with people, or do you want to come back at 1:45?
1 o'clock would be lovely.
1:45?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock?
Lunch here now.
Okay. Yes, yeah.
We could just about knock off.
Is the
Okay,
cricket still on?
10 minutes.
so we're breaking now for lunch and we return at 1.
Wow.
Is the cricket finished yet?
Like a real lunch.